Throughout history, war has been and is the ultimate destroyer of life and property. In Matthew 24, Jesus actually says that in the latter years, the very time in which we now live, will be marked by, among other things, an increase in wars and rumors of wars. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Bible prophesies that a group of nations, including Turkey and Russia, Iran, Libya, Sudan, and other confederate nations, will come down in alignment against Israel to do battle or war, motivated by a desire to take the wealth of Israel. And with that, I welcome you to part 2 of a 2-part series entitled Israel and the World at War, What We Need to Know. Now, last week on this program with special guest Albert Veksler, Global Director of the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, Isaac and I discussed with him, and he's back with us today, the unfolding Middle East war. But in reality, it's a global war triggered by the demonically committed group called Hamas. The world changed forever on that October 7 day. And on that day, Hamas wreaked historic violence against Israel. And while that particular day was a surprise, the attack against Israel and the violence and cruelty manifested against Israel was no surprise to all who are alert. And since that day, sister groups such as Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the other nations, as they align against Israel, they have all restated over and over and over again their commitment to the destruction of Israel, to the eradication of all Jews and the death of America. They're all put together. I also shared last week how that the Hebrew word Hamas occurs over 60 times in the Old Testament, and it's translated as violence or cruelty. And that's what they're doing. Now today in part 2, we want to build upon last week's program and look ahead to the further unfolding of prophecy and the significant underlying actions we're seeing through the lens of religious eschatology. Now, there's another biblical principle at work as well in these days that arises from clear warnings given by God to Israel way back in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and other places. And that warning is that any nation once knowing God but then walking away from Him would experience the judgment of God in the form of very specific forms of pestilence and pandemic and famine and bizarre weather, and ultimately concluding in war that would destroy the nation. Now, that happened to Israel in the past. God's now brought them back, and we're now going into part 2 of biblical prophecy. But what's confronting America today is we are being touched by that prophecy. It's what's going to happen to all ungodly nations at the end of the tribulation, as spelled out in Psalm chapter 2, when God Himself wages battle and defeats the devil and the Antichrist nations who have aligned with Him. Wars can be driven by greed or the lust for power or wealth, but in the end, nations are driven by their worldview, and the nations that attack Israel, as described in Scripture, are driven by an eschatological viewpoint, their view of eternity, where they reject God and God's promises to Israel, and they do the bidding of the devil, whose goal is to destroy God's promises to His chosen people, the Jews, His chosen nation, Israel, and His chosen city, Jerusalem. And it's that most fundamental religious viewpoint that has emerged in a blossomed way since October 7, which will drive and is driving a hatred, not only of the Jews, but frankly toward all true Christians, God's anointed as well. And with that, I want to welcome back to the program today Albert Veksler, connecting with us right directly from the city of Jerusalem. Albert, thank you so much for being back with Isaac and I today.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for having me today, Isaac.
Albert, the last program was really very good. We want to take and build off of that. I want to ask you a question because, as we said, major things have changed in the minds of people, in public policies, all the kind of things, as a result of October 7. But one thing we cannot get away from, Albert, and that is the hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism has seemed to go on a meteoric rise around the world. I'm interested from your perspective. Why? Can you give a couple of reasons of why we are seeing this so dramatically expand in these days, which we're watching?
Well, anti-Semitism is, of course, a very old phenomenon. I mean, we talk about the Pharaoh killing the Jewish children in Egypt. We talk about the Greeks trying to push Israel to believe in multiple gods. And all of this, we know from the history, Hitler and all what it led to. But I want to point out something that maybe people haven't noticed. These demonstrations, pro-Hamas demonstrations, bringing hundreds of thousands of people out to the streets in London or in Paris and Washington and in different places, Berlin, they did not start when Israeli land incursions started to Gaza Strip. They started prior to that. And this was more of a celebration of the Hamas's quote-unquote successful attack on Israel, murdering and slaughtering our children, our women, our elderly. There is something very demonic. And I mean, that these demonic things don't die. Hitler died and Pharaoh died, but these things are still around. And it seems like you saw a signal go through the spiritual realm that this Jewish blood made them mad. I mean, they were on the streets. They were, celebrating, in a sense, that horrible, horrible day of October 7th. And so to see it spread now all over the world, from Asia to United States to Europe, and I mean, it goes even much deeper. I mean, we are hearing from people from their homes that, children at school are telling other kids Israel has to be erased, or there are Muslim gangs beating up other kids in Germany, and it's been going stronger and stronger and stronger, and truly it is a demonic manifestation that we observe. And
Albert, I think that's perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, the rise in anti-Semitism, point being made, didn't and is not increasing because of the Hamas incursion. It's happening, as we see across the world, using that as a justification, but the demonic hatred for the Jewish people and God's anointed have existed since God made His promise to Abraham. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Albert Veksler, right straight from Jerusalem.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. And as you've heard Sam and our guest today, Albert Veksler, talking about the enemies of Israel and the spiritual warfare that's going on. I want to ask our guest, Albert Veksler, about something that's been going on that hasn't received maybe a lot of attention here in the Western news. But speaking of enemies of Israel, over in Iran, and I believe even at a shrine in Iraq, but at the Meza shrine in Iran, a black, kind of a special black flag has been raised over the shrine. And for many Muslims, they believe, sometimes they will say they believe in a Messiah, and they call it the Mahdi. And their version of Messiah is what we believe, especially in the New Testament, is pointing to an anti-Messiah or an antichrist. And it's someone who will come back and their Islamic teaching, he'll come with the official order to kill the non-Muslims worldwide, attacking Jerusalem, killing Jewish people, and blood running in the street. And so I'd just like to ask you, Albert, since these flags have gone up, and since there seems to be some, like in Iran, calling for this Mahdi to return, what have you seen maybe from Jewish people or even the Israeli government? How they look at that? Are they seeing this and are they interpreting it in any special significance?
I am not sure that this has really reached the understanding of our government yet. Of course, they know that we deal with a murderous entity like Hamas, and they understand that there is a religious motivation behind these things. But again, coming to your question, I mean, we are talking about a eschatology and the theology of Shia Islam that basically is looking to creating a world chaos. And of course, Iranian nuclear ambitions would perfectly serve that end, to create a chaos so that their redeemer would come. It would work really good if you have a nuclear weapon. So in that sense, you need to understand, and obviously secular people have a hard time understanding these things. There is a spiritual force, there is a spiritual motivation, and it stirs up the Muslims all over the world. And so this dimension, the spiritual dimension, has to be spoken about, has to be understood, and because it will not disappear, and it will not just end when people have better life or better economic conditions. I mean, Osama bin Laden comes from a billionaire family. I mean, those people who flew into the Twin Towers, they were not poor. They had no land to conquer. They had no problem. They had a religious problem, and this was their religious solution. So to see how it has now, spread all over the world, the extent of it, that's what has been a wake-up call for many, many nations, many, many people. They have understood that they've received people with this Muslim background worldview into the very heart of Europe, into the very heart of the nations that used to be Christian nations. And of course, it is not hard to predict what will happen next, because this is what they're saying from the very beginning. They say, we will kill all the Jews, we'll take Jerusalem, and then when we have finished with the Sabbath people, we will come to the Sunday people. The whole world must become an Islamic caliphate.
And Albert, what Isaac just asked you, and I think if our viewers right now are watching us, walk away with that. This conflict, regardless of what you're hearing, ladies and gentlemen, on secular news, this is not a political conflict. This is spiritual, right to its heart. Albert's used the word demonic in reference to Hamas. I have too. And we're referring to what Shia Islam is wanting to do. Blood run in the streets, collapse Jerusalem, kill all the Jews. And you hear what Albert just said? Their view is go and kill the Sabbath people first, the Jews, then we go to the Sunday people. Who's that? Christian. That's why I said at the beginning, this issue of persecution coming, it's not just to the Jews. It's to God's anointed, which are also believers. We must understand this, I think, together. To undergird what you are saying, Albert, not just as Shia Islam, referring to the Mahdi and their view of eschatology, their coming Messiah, I have found it interesting that even like former president of Russia, Medvedev, just some time ago referred to in a very derogatory way, attacked or accused Israel of aligning with all things Molech. Molech is an Old Testament idol towards people where people were sacrificed. And he accused Israel of sacrificing to Moloch somehow. I thought that was interesting by going into the Gaza. But I thought, isn't that interesting? A Russian president referring to an Old Testament idol, Moloch? But then Netanyahu is referring to Isaiah. Christians are referring to Ezekiel 38. Here's my question to you in this regard. What is the significance as you're looking at this? Because it seems like all sides are referring now and we're going back to their theological view of the future as a justification for what they're doing, but they don't agree. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it definitely points to the fact that we are dealing with a spiritual war, first and foremost. Now, of course, the soldiers have to do their job on the ground, and I would really ask you to pray for our soldiers, because this is a very, very hard and very, very difficult job that they are doing. They need to make an end to this entity called Hamas, because we cannot live side by side with such horrible murderers. But coming back, yes, to your question, it shows that the spiritual dimension has been stirred up. I mean, of course, hearing from Medvedev, these words are really ridiculous. I mean, especially after these horrible atrocities Russian soldiers have committed in Ukraine for more than a year now. And it's, I mean, really shocking that these kind of words are even used. But you see, Russian Orthodox have always claimed that they are the new Israel, that Israel has been now done away with, and so that they have their new role of bringing redemption to this world. So, I mean, there's a replacement theology that is being reproduced and coming back time and time again. But again, Bible is very clear. Israel is Israel as long as stars and moon and sun are shining in heaven. Israel will be a nation before God. And like Amos said, when he regathered us to this land, we will never be plucked again from this country.
Well, you've brought up so many points, and I wish we had more time to pick your brain on these things. But you did talk about the impossibility of living side by side with Hamas. And it brings up the question of a two-state solution, which even, President Biden and really all the American presidents have always been pushing still this two-state solution to Israel. And yet, as we see now, more and more, it seems impossible. You can't have the two living side by side when one group wants to spiritually, speaking for spiritual purposes, eradicate the other. What do you think of the leadership in Israel right now? Are they willing to consider a two-state solution, or do you think even if it meant losing the support of the few nations who are their allied nations right now, would they lose that support to go after a one-state solution for Israel?
Well, it's a very good question whether there is a one-state solution. We have, heard since 1967 the terms like West Bank. What is a West Bank? Well, Jordan occupied illegally, was not recognized by any other countries but Britain and Pakistan. Jordan occupies the areas of Samaria and Judea, eastern Jerusalem, and annexes them. So Jordan had the East Bank, and now they have the West Bank. So that's the reason how this term came about. Now, they have never really given up on these territories, and they have never given up on the idea of destroying the state of Israel. The PLO, they had something called phased plan. So what did they mean? They said any steps that Israel will take, any territories we will get, we will use them as spearheads, bridgeheads, in order to destroy the state of Israel. They've never really changed their mind. So with whom should Israel even talk to? I mean, if you remember, Benjamin Netanyahu was asking Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority, chairman who has been in power without elections since 2006, I think, because he cannot have any elections. He cannot be re-elected. He has always asked him, do you recognize the Jewish state? Do you recognize the right of the Jewish people to exist as a country, as a state? And he has never got an answer. So the moment that President Biden or anybody else who is telling us about the two-state solution will find somebody that will be able to administrate these poor Palestinian Arabs that would not be bent to Israel's destruction, well, maybe then we can start thinking about the two-state solution.
It's such an interesting thing, and we could spend so much time talking about that, but how can you call it a solution when there's a side that spiritually ingrained now for thousands of years wants to get rid of the Jewish people and they don't see it? Well, this has been so helpful, so learning experience for us. We're coming to the end of this program, and so we're going to take a break, and we want to come back and talk to Albert Veksler about what we as Christians here in America, what we can do. We talked last week about how we could pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but what more can we do right here, right now for the peace of Jerusalem? We'll be right back on Stand in the Gap.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website lighthousetv.org for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Well, Albert, again, thank you for being with us this second week. And like always, there's not enough time. There's so much more that we could cover. But we do want to conclude this program like we did last time. Isaac had just mentioned on the other side that last week we had asked you to express what you believe praying for the peace of Jerusalem meant, because clearly we're all instructed as Christians to pray for that. Let's go a little bit further. One thing for sure, as we've talked about in this program, the increase in persecution is coming not only to Jews, but it's coming to Christians. It's a spiritual battle. All right, with that in mind, is there anything that you can say to Christians who are watching how we can better pray, or maybe there's something else that we can do as we think about what we see developing in this spiritual warfare, really, that is unfolding before our eyes?
Thank you, Sam. I think we are in for a long war. That's number one. And we would need to have our minds on a marathon. I mean, we should plan prayer meetings, we should plan fasting, and we should really ask the Lord when to take these steps. Now, we know from the Bible, Esther, she fasted and prayed. And I believe that many can do the same in order to talk to your elected officials. There are things that you can do as Esther did. You can go and talk to your congressman, you can talk, you can write, you can speak to your senator, and there are many other things that can be done. I mean, we've been so encouraged, every time that we see a demonstration in places where they have such a hostile atmosphere, like South Africa, that they would come and have a demonstration, pro-Israel demonstration, or they would set a table, for all our hostages that are kept in dungeons of Hamas. I mean, they've set the tables and they've been praying for those children, toddlers, babies, mothers, elderly, Holocaust survivors that are kept without a sunlight in these tunnels of Hamas in Gaza Strip. Every time that Christians do show solidarity, prayer, bringing the flag of Israel to the public places, posting something on the Instagram, Twitter is helping us.
And Albert, you set us up. We're at the end of the curtain. We have to go. Thank you so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you, as you pray for, actually, Albert's one of his sons. He is in the IDF. He is there. Albert didn't say it, but pray for him and all those who are there. I can also say, look around for your Jewish neighbors. Great time to share the gospel. There's a lot of solidarity because the spiritual battle is against not just them, but us if we're a true believer. Much we can pray for. Be alert. And more, ladies and gentlemen, do what the Bible says. Live holy lives. Keep our eyes alert. Pray for wisdom. And like we always say, stand in the gap for truth.